Yum, yum!
Hey everybody, welcome back to Modo with Ellery, and in this episode, this is going to be just a quick walkthrough of how to use and modify texture layers in order to get a nice looking material inside of Modo. So what I've got here, I've got a starting point. Let's pull over. So what I have here is a patent leather out of Substance Designer, and it's just a really simple material here. So we've got a base color, which we'll use. It's just our color. We have leather height, which in this case is blank because there's no displacement on this material, so we don't even actually need to bring it in. There is a metallic layer, which in this case is just a dark gray that's going to be handled by the material inside of Modo, so we can leave that out as well. And then we have a normal map and a roughness map, both of which we're going to make some edits to in order to get something that's a little bit more powerful and adjustable inside of Modo. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pull these off to the side here, and I'm just going to be grabbing the base color, the normal, and the roughness, and I've got this scene here. It's just a simple scene with HDR lighting and a shadow catcher, one of the Modo stock content presets from the cloud assets. So I'm just going to grab all three of these and drag and drop those into the ball layer here, and they'll drop it and they'll populate, of course, all as diffuse color, and we're going to switch them to the appropriate channels, which are going to be diffuse color, normal, and roughness, and then we'll go on from there. So everything's getting loaded in right now, and there we go. And at the moment, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pause my render here in preview render so that I don't have to worry about that trying to update as I'm changing different material settings here. So let's start here with roughness, which I'm going to click and change this over to roughness, and then I'll also do the same thing with the normal and change that over to normal. Continuing. So here under basic, we'll choose roughness, and then for the normal map, we'll go here and down under surface shading, put on normal. It'll ask if you want to color correct. I don't tell this to always say yes in the future, just because this comes up when I'm doing training or materials like that, and I want this to come up so people see that this is there. But this is just asking if it wants the proper color correction essentially for a normal map. So we'll just click yes, and that comes up, and we'll make sure that it has the ball shader on it, and it should turn red once that happens. And then we'll be able to, there we go, and then we can go in and actually start looking at what we've got here. So if you look at the images that are actually in here, you can see that the leather normal and the leather roughness are both fairly monochromatic. So if I take this and I'm just going to open this up in Photoshop. There's our normal map, and then I will do the same over here with the roughness. So let's also open that up in Photoshop. See that the normal map back from here looks essentially just like it's all purple. Now, if we zoom in really far, and whether or not you can pick this up on the recorded version is, I'm not sure, but you can see there's a very faint normal map there. All right, and then same thing here with the roughness. It's there, but it is a very, very faint variation in the amount of roughness that we'll get out of that. So let's hop back over into Modo, and let's make sure, oops, our diffuse amount was set to 0. I want to set that back up to 80. This is basically our default Modo shader here with those things added in. So we've got roughness mapped in, we have a normal map put in, and we get a decidedly unexciting result. Basically, it looks like I took the ball and tinted it red, and that's it. Now, there are a few things going on that we need to take into account when we're bringing in a set of textures like this in order to make them actually look good. And the first thing is you want to pay attention to the scale of the object that you're applying them to. In this case, I've already done that. This sphere is about 200 millimeters, which is in the ballpark of a small tabletop size object that I may want to put this on. This is supposed to be leather, so shoe, purse, handbag, something like that. So this is about the right scale for that. So that's one thing. And then another thing is we need to take into account how much variation you want and how much you want to be able to control this inside of Modo. Now, in this case, our normal map is really, really faint here. So So we're not really going to get a lot out of that. Now, if I take this and I set this to full resolution on the render, we'll be able to actually take this and zoom in so that we can see a little bit better here. So if I'm zooming into 200% now, just so I can see this a bit better, you can see there is a little bit of normal map on there, but it is very, very difficult to read on this surface. Okay, so now we want to be able to increase the amount of normal map, and I also want to be able to increase the amount of roughness, and then some other things that are going on here, because right now the roughness value as is not really working for me. It's a very low roughness that basically is making this essentially shiny, which is not what we want if we want this to look a little bit more like leather. So let's hop back over here into Photoshop and we'll make some adjustments. And I'm going to start with the let's start with the normal map. So with the normal map, if we go into the channels, you can see what's actually going on with the normal map, and it's there is direction from up down in the red channel, directional light from left right in the green channel, and then the blue channel is going to be just basically the depth of the bump map, kind of like a bump map on top of the normal map, and that's what gives the normal map itself its depth. Now if we look in here and I bring up my info, basically we'll see that this is all white. Right? We just want to sample here, and I can sample a few areas if we want, but basically you can see it's all white. Now with the green layer, you see we actually get some stuff going on. And again, I'm pretty zoomed in here, but you can see it's fairly faint again. Same thing with the red. Now since I don't have anything in the blue, I don't really have anything to amplify in this case. But what I can do is I can increase the depth of the red and the green so that I get a bit more out of them. I'm going to do that with levels. So Control L to give me my levels adjustments, and you see that all of my color information is right around 50% gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in my blacks. Let's go to 80 about, and then I'm going to pull down my blacks here, which will go, 160 something. Basically what I'm looking for is keeping the midtones kind of lined up with the center there, so that I'm not offsetting this any, but I am increasing the contrast. Now, I could go a bit more than that, but I think this will illustrate the point. Let's do the same thing here in the red channel. So again, levels, again, I'm going to go up to about 80 here. And let's pull this one down until we get our midtones back in the midtone range. And now when I go back to my RGB, lo and behold, you actually start to see this pattern a bit more. Even zoomed out now, we start to see not only the very fine grain patterns, but some larger scale things going on as well. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and save this. And I'm going to call this normal 2, so I'm not saving over my original. And let's click OK. And then we'll do the same kind of thing here with our roughness. And all I really care about doing here is increasing the contrast. I'm not super worried about where the midpoint lies in this case. And this is going to look super loud, noisy. That's okay, because this amount of contrast will allow us to have much better adjustments inside of Modo, and it will allow us to drive things with far more granularity than we would if we were just to drop on a map and then make some tweaks to the map inside of Modo. So let's go ahead and click OK. Save as, and we'll call this roughness 2. And we'll click OK. And now we'll actually be able to go ahead and use these. So I've got my normal 2 and my roughness 2. They're there in the same folder. So let's just move this off to the side, and we'll go back into Modo. All right, so here inside of Modo, once again, I'm going to pause my rendering because I don't want to sit around and wait for this to update while I'm trying to adjust stuff. Let's start with the roughness, because that's going to be a little bit more pronounced before I add on the normal map. So I'm going to take my roughness that I have here. And so from here, I want to go in and I'm going to choose roughness 2 instead of just roughness there. And we'll go ahead and click open. And that's going to apply. And then we'll go ahead and unpause our render. And at first, this is going to look a little on the weird side. It's going to be super contrasty. But what we want to do is take this and use this to modulate an underlying roughness value, which we can set on the material itself. And then we have something that's much easier to fine-tune here in our render. So we'll give this a second to update. And there we go. And you can see already at very least, the shininess of the ball is gone here. Now, this is a little bit overdone now, but what we can do is go ahead and make some changes here by changing the blend mode from normal to multiply. And now what this is doing is it's taking these color values which if we pull up here, we can see the image again. It's taking these color values and it's applying those where white areas are going to have the full amount of roughness of our base layer, and black areas are going to have 0%, and everything in between gets a variation of the roughness that's underneath. So what I'm going to do now is going to make some tweaks to the actual roughness of the material itself, and then we'll be able to actually see the full effect of this adjusted texture layer. So let's go down to our material here. And I'm going to set this from the default, which is 40, up to, let's try 70%. So let's go to the material layer here. 40, we'll change up to 70. We'll go from there. And now, you see, we're starting to get something that's a little bit more interesting with this roughness value here. Okay, and I think that's gonna work pretty well. And now one other thing that I want to do here, I'm noticing I'm getting some stretching here, and upon further inspection I realized that the texture locator is set to cubic. I want to make sure that's on UV map, and that my texture UV, which is the UV that comes on this sphere, it's just a Modo primitive sphere, by default is what we want to put on there. So this won't change the actual effect of anything here, but it will change the mapping so that we get something a little bit cleaner. There we go. So now we actually see the areas on there more accurately instead of just being stamped on in a cubic fashion. So there we go. So now we see the real variation of the roughness, and we can go in and fine tune this pretty easily just by adjusting the roughness values in the material itself, and then we can multiply with this. All right, so let's move on then and look at the normal map, because now we've taken this normal map and we've got a newer one, which I'm going to go ahead and load in here. So again, we'll go in here, add clip, load image, and we'll bring in the leather normal 2 and replace this here. So we go here, leather normal 2, update. And now we'll see that we get the same message here asking us about the normal color space. If you're doing this on your own, you can always just go ahead and click always yes. I am just going to click yes, and that way we'll start to get our actual normal shaded the way it's supposed to. So there we go, and now we can actually look here and we start to see some little bits of changes in the surface. So the normal map is actually doing something now. Now at its original levels, it really wasn't giving us any kind of depth to the material. Now if you want something extremely subtle, that's fine, but you can take this kind of a normal map and you can very easily decrease the amount of depth it has simply by taking the opacity and starting to duck it back a little bit. Whereas if you've got something where there's just nothing really going on, it's too faint to actually read on the surface, then you're kind of stuck. It's a lot harder to multiply and get more out of your surface inside of Modo than it is to take something and tone it down a little bit for the most part. So that's kind of the basic overview of what we've got going on here with this kind of a material setup with these layers. So just having your roughness, your normal, and your base color. Now there are a couple of things that you may want to do depending on the surface that you're working with in order to get, again, just a bit more out of it. And one is going to be taking your base color and duplicating that into your specular color, and then also maybe blending that down. So here, let's take and zoom this out just a little bit there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my base color here. Let's go ahead and pause our render. Right click, and I'm going to create an instance of this because I want to, if I want to make any changes to the base color, I want this to go along for the right as well. And let's change this from the diffuse color to our specular color. And I'm going to start just by leaving the opacity at 100%. But you'll see that all of these areas here are going to get very, very knocked back and will look much less reflective, which could be an issue that you want if you want something to be very subtle on your reflections. But if you want something that looks like a bit more of a shiny leather in this case, we can go back and adjust this opacity down to bring back some of the lighter colored reflections that are existing in this version here that we're seeing before it updates. So there you can see that it is now much, much more subtle, and we have this hot spot. The hot spot is actually tinted red. So this is a little bit overdone for what I'm doing. this would be better if we're looking for something that is a more porous surface, something like a kind of fabric or something like that. But in the case of the leather, I want a little bit more kind of shininess to it. So I'm going to duck this back to maybe 20%. And what that's going to do is give us a little bit of tint on those reflections, so they're not quite so crazy, not so bright. And then also it will help it kind of blend into the surface a little bit more. So two other little changes that I'm going to make here. And these are both going to be ones that are going to depend on the surface that you're working on. In this case, when I have very kind of small fine-tuned adjustments in different areas across the surface, very subtle modulation, I like to change up the anti-aliasing filter, and the preview render will support that if you're in any of the newer versions of Modo. I believe 901, but any of the ones of the last couple years for sure. And that's going to be to go to my render tab settings here, and my anti-alias filter is defaulting to Gaussian. And what I want to change this to is Mitchell-Netravalli, and that will actually give just slightly sharper details when you have subtle variation. So in this case, if you take a before and after, you'll see that this is actually a little bit more crisp, and we kind of see some of those details a little bit more. And then the other change that I want to do is, because I have this roughness change, this roughness values across the surface here, I want to go in and adjust the per ray Fresnel, which is under channels. So you select your material, go all the way to the bottom of channels, and the last setting here is per ray Fresnel, which here, let's go ahead and I'm going to let this refine a little bit, and then I'll pause it, and we'll do one with and without that per ray Fresnel on. So that looks good. Let's pause it, hold Control over this little orange dot in the corner, click and drag to the right, and we'll get our preview render split. And then with that one paused, or both of them paused rather, I'm going to turn per ray Fresnel to true, and then I'm going to unpause this one on the right. And what we'll get is we get to see the two of them in a side-by-side comparison. And it kind of gives you a little bit better idea. But what it's going to do basically is going to take these areas where we're getting Fresnel reflections, so the more pronounced reflections, and it's going to allow those to more properly take advantage of our roughness settings, which, since we spent some time adjusting the roughness values, we want to see that propagate on through the Fresnel in the reflections so that we get something that has a little bit better feel to it. So let's let this render for a second, and then we'll see a side-by-side comparison. So there we go. That's had a second to refine now. And so if we look here at the couple of edges where we're getting strong Fresnel reflections, both right here and especially right here at the top, you can see that on the one on the left, which does not have the per ray Fresnel on, we're getting a fairly smooth reflection across the top. Whereas here on this one, the one on the right that has per ray Fresnel turned on, we actually see some breakup based on the roughness values of our reflections. So that gives us something that looks a little bit better. Now, one last thing that I'll throw in here just is something that you may find of use, is adding a little bit of a gradient with incidence angle in order to kind of taper off the amount of color that you get at the edges. So this is again going to mimic the way light is going to be absorbed more as you're looking at something edge long with that Fresnel effect as opposed to straight on. So once again, like usual here, I'm going to pause this one here, and actually I've got them both paused. I'm going to unpause the one on the left so that we can see before and after right next to each other here. And I'm going to go ahead and add on under processing a gradient. And by default, that's going to come in as incidence, which is what we want for our input parameter. And for the value, I'm just going to, or rather for the color, excuse me, I'm going to go right down here towards the end. This is going to be 100% at this second line, or actually it's the third line, 1, 2, 3, so the one all the way to right-hand side. And I'm going to middle mouse click somewhere here towards the lower end. Now I'm going to be adjusting the opacity on this to kind of tweak it, so I'm not really going to worry about exactly where I am here. Now if you want this to be exactly the same every time, you can go in, edit gradient, and put in an exact value that you use every time, and that's fine. I usually hit around between 0.2 and 0.25 when I do it this way, so it's close enough that you know, I can just do that and then adjust my opacity as I go. And the opacity also, I know I'm going to take back to maybe about 40% here to start. And so that's now our diffuse color, which I want to set to multiply. So white is going to be basically the red, down to a little bit darker gray is going to push that red back a little bit. We've got it set to multiply, 40% opacity, and now let's go ahead and unpause this one on the left, and we'll see the difference between the one with everything else done and the one with a little bit of a gradient to kind of taper and attenuate the color as we get towards those incidence angles where we would see a bit more reflection. All right, so that's refined a little bit now, and now we can see here at the edges we're getting just this little bit of darkening just right there. It kind of helps define the surface, and with more complex surfaces it will help you give a little bit more definition to the surface itself, and you can very easily adjust the amount of this that you're getting here just by adjusting the opacity values. And so just a quick recap, by taking the three initial maps that we had a diffuse color, a normal map, and a roughness map. We took and increased the amount of contrast on each of the layers for both the roughness and the normal maps. That will allow us to get a little bit more out of them, and also something that we can adjust up or down inside of Modo. Then taking the roughness value, and instead of applying it stock, we're actually using it as a multiply over the value that's inside of our material itself. This will allow us to take the roughness value on the material, and we can drive up the whole thing and still get the variation without having to go in and change multiple values inside of the image map, or by changing in an entirely new image map. Just that updated higher contrast image map gives us something a little bit better to work with. And then we added on our per ray Fresnel. We put on a little bit of a gradient with our edges here with to kind of take advantage also of that Fresnel effect, and then all in all we end up with a finished shader that's pretty easy to adjust right here inside of Modo. So if you like this video and videos like it, please feel free to follow and subscribe on the YouTube channel. You can also follow along at patreon.com/Ellery, where subscribers can get downloadable versions of not just the videos, but also of the content files as well, so you can work right along with me. If you'd like to get this episode or any other episode of Modo with Ellery a la carte, you can get individual episodes or packs of episodes at Gumroad, and that's gumroad.com/Ellery. So that does it for this one. Now go make something cool, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yum, yum!